And we, all of us, have to make sure that that justice is delivered, and rightly, because when lives have been lost in such a terrible way, justice is the minimum they deserve.
Sir David Davis.
I hope the Home Secretary will not take it as a discourtesy if I say to her that actually it should be the Prime Minister making this statement here today. I say that because this morning he said on television that singleton terrorist attacks were a very new occurrence. They're not. They've been going on for nearly a decade, many in London, one in the yard of this House of Commons, and of course one killed Sir David Amess, our colleague. And in that attack on Sir David Amess, the police declared it a terrorist incident the same day, without 3 prevent references, without writing, without an Al-Qaeda manual. They declared it a terrorist event the same day. So we all wonder why this was not the case here, when there was such evidence. This is a clear mistake, is it not?
Home Secretary.
So the decision about the application of the Terrorism Act 2000 is one for the police and ultimately the CPS when they lay charges based on the operational information that they have. The prosecution will lay out more information that they put before sentencing that they would have put before the court on Tuesday had the information today. So we'd had the offender not pleaded guilty initially, and that is for them to decide. But the point the Prime Minister made this morning was that this was clearly a case where someone attempted to terrorise the community. That was clearly his intention, to kill those children and also to terrorise more widely. And that is why we have to ensure that even where there are cases where the police or the prosecution say they have not been able to prove ideology, that we still have the right powers, the right sentencing, the right ability to respond with swiftness and seriousness to the kinds of cases we face. And that is why he has said that this needs to be reviewed. I referred to the independent reviewer of terrorism, powers looking at these issues. And it's also why we have this statement to the House and are making this inquiry, because where I would disagree with him when he said, well, we've had these cases for a long time, the thing we've seen in very recent years is this really big increase in youth violence and extremism on a really disturbing scale. And I do think that needs to be part of the inquiry as well.
Sean Davis.
Can I associate myself and my community with a statement from the Home Secretary on this tragic incident? Whether it be purchasing knives online or whether it be the sharing of these horrible videos celebrating violence and death, there's clearly a gap between the ability of the state to hold social media companies to account and also online retailers. What more can the government do, together with the intelligence services, to take robust action and hold to account these companies that are allowing this extremism, this violence, this horror to be present on their social media companies?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important point. We are raising with the companies some of the particular dangerous material that this terrible offender accessed online, and the police and prosecution will say more about some of that material later this week. But he's also right to highlight the issue around online knife sales, because we know from the case of Ronan Kanda, who was so brutally murdered by a ninja sword, where the perpetrator was able to get that, just buy it online, just pick it up with no age checks at all. And in this case, for a 17-year-old to be able to just get the knife that he was able to use online from Amazon, that is just frankly shocking. Commander Stephen Clayman has been doing a review for us on online knife sales and on the kinds of checks that should be taking place, and we will, based on that review, be bringing forward new measures to tackle this problem.
James Cleverly.
I'm particularly drawn to the line in the immediate learning review that it concludes that too much weight was placed on the absence of ideology without considering the vulnerabilities to radicalisation. I mean, the fact is, much of the challenge over the summer is because there was an understandable lack of public understanding of the distinction between a terrorist incident and a non-terrorist incident. Had this person done exactly the same thing but was driven by a desire to create a caliphate here in the UK, this would, of course, be defined as a terrorist attack. The fact it didn't is of no solace to those families who have lost loved ones. Is it now not the time? And I appreciate this could be part of the review, but I would urge her to make sure this is a particular emphasis of the review, to get rid of this entirely arbitrary distinction with motivation and focus exclusively on the risk and the actions.
Home Secretary.
Well, I think the right honourable member, the former Home Secretary, makes an extremely important point here, because from the point of view of families, from the point of view of the community, this was an attack that was intended to terrorise the community, and also from the point of view of families, the real concern is about the scale of harm that they've seen, the loss of children's lives and the impact on that community as well. The law is set out in the Terrorism Act 2000, and there is also a serious consideration for different agencies about the nature of the response. So if you have an ideological attack or a motivation, then it may be that the kind of countering extremism response, the kind of support that the Channel programme provides, might be targeted in one particular way if it is around an extremist ideology that needs to be challenged and tackled and taken down, or alternatively, if the issue is around mental health or the issue is around obsession with violence and gore, those may need different kinds of response. But he is right that the threats, from the point of view of the community, will feel the same. That's why the law needs to be looked at again, but it's also why we need to have this inquiry that can look at where the gaps are in the way in which different state agencies respond, because we've seen those growing gaps, and we've seen, obviously, those gaps in the most traumatic of ways in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the statement the Home Secretary has made today? And in her statement and in the Prime Minister's speech this morning, they have painted a terrifying picture of how terrorism is changing in this country and the threat that we face is evolving, especially with the proliferation of extremely violent online content, and which is having an effect on mixed ideologies and from ideologies across the spectrum. Clearly, part of the response to this is going to be the response of the intelligence services. So can the Home Secretary tell us about how the intelligence services will be responding to this evolving threat and what the government is doing to prevent this growth of extremism through extreme online content?
Home Secretary.
Well, he's right that what we seem to have is cases where there is extreme violence or obsession grows around extreme violence, and then you have young people who then may cast around to maybe consuming different kinds of terrorist material or extremist material, but at its heart may be an obsession with violence as well. So different circumstances then require different kinds of response, but actually the scale of the growing obsession with violence should be a serious concern to us, because you do think, what are we allowing to happen to our kids and to our teenagers if we've seen this kind of obsession grow? And that's why we need action. Clearly, the focus of the intelligence and security agencies is around those cases where particularly there is organised ideology and radicalisation, as well as state threats. But we have to deal with the kinds of threats that our society faces much more widely, and that means everyone needs to be part of it.
Gathins.
Speaker, can I associate myself with the remarks of colleagues about the murder of these 3 wee girls, the bravery of the first responders, but most of all we think about the families of those left behind. Can I also agree that the way in which we talk about these kind of cases, we have a responsibility to the victims to make sure we do so responsibly while keeping the government under scrutiny? There is a fast evolving situation in terms of technology companies. Can the Home Secretary tell us what areas she's looking at in terms of enforcement, but can she also tell me that it's a multi-agency, very diverse case? What interaction is she having with the Scottish Government and the devolved administrations in the areas where they have responsibility? Thank you.
Home Secretary.
Well, the honourable member is right that there are issues around the the responsibility of social media companies, and the stronger powers will obviously be brought in as part of the Online Safety Act, but we are urging the companies to take responsibility now and not to continue to profit from really dangerous material that is putting kids at risk. In terms of the discussions with the Scottish Government, we actually have broad discussions planned for later this week around some of our shared